She remembered something Elias had said, a line she hadn't understood until now. You were never meant to solve it. You were meant to witness it. Maybe that was the real purpose behind everything, witnessing, feeling, understanding just enough to unsettle, but not enough to destroy. Imagine looking up at the sky your whole life, thinking you've seen everything our solar system has to offer, planets, moons, stars twinkling from galaxies far beyond. But what if I told you there's something else out there? Something massive, something mysterious, something powerful enough to disturb the orbits of entire planets, yet NASA barely mentions it. Welcome to the dark mystery of Planet X, also called Nibiru, a name whispered in conspiracy circles, censored in scientific communities, and deliberately erased from your news feed.
Why?
Because what you're about to discover could change the way you see the universe forever. And trust me, if you've clicked on this video wondering if Planet X is real, if it's dangerous, or why the world's top space agency seems to pretend it doesn't exist, you're in the right place. You're going to get answers. Clear ones. But by the time we reach the end of this video, those answers might raise even bigger questions, questions that don't just affect the cosmos, but you, personally. Now, before we dive in, I want to speak directly to you, not just as a narrator or voice behind a screen, but as someone who's just as curious, just as skeptical, and just as drawn to the unexplained as you are. You know that feeling when something doesn't quite add up? When you see patterns others ignore? When you feel there's a truth buried deep beneath official stories? That's what this journey is about. This isn't just space talk. It's a psychological tug-of-war between what you've been told and what your instincts are screaming at you to question. We've been conditioned to look at the sky as a cold, predictable place. But what if it's not? What if something colossal, perhaps even catastrophic, is out there and has been for a long time, hiding in the shadows, just waiting to emerge? See, most people scroll past headlines like, NASA denies existence of Planet X, or astronomers baffled by gravitational anomalies because they think it's just another theory for fringe thinkers. But you didn't scroll past. You clicked. That's not a mistake. That tells me you're different. You're someone who wants to understand what's really going on. And here's the master move. This video isn't going to throw a bunch of wild speculation at you. It's going to track the real science, the leaked documents, the whistleblower testimonies, and even the ancient prophecies that seem to echo across time, all pointing to a single, chilling possibility. There is something else in our solar system, and the silence around it is no accident. Let's pull the curtain back together. Let's follow the breadcrumbs mainstream science leaves behind. In the next few minutes, we're going to look at suspicious orbital paths, dive into the strange behavior of Neptune and Uranus, explore the 2016 Caltech research that reopened the case for a ninth planet, and uncover why certain telescope data was quietly classified. These aren't clickbait headlines. These are events with paper trails, datasets, and people who have risked careers to speak out. You'll meet them. You'll hear their voices. And more importantly, you'll understand why this mystery is more urgent now than ever before. But there's another layer to this. A psychological one. See, fear is a powerful motivator, but so is curiosity. You might not even realize it, but right now your brain is processing this topic through two lenses: survival and truth-seeking. We're hardwired to look for patterns, to detect danger, to seek answers where there's uncertainty. The hidden planet theory taps into all of that, and that's why it's been pushed to the margins. It doesn't just challenge science, it challenges how we think, how we feel, how we trust. NASA isn't just withholding data, they're shaping our perception of reality. And whether you believe that's for protection or control, that's the real conflict at the heart of this story. We'll also go back, way back, because the idea of a hidden planet isn't new. Ancient Sumerian texts refer to a wandering celestial body called Nibiru, a destructive force with an elliptical orbit, said to return every few thousand years. Could that be Planet X? And if so, why are those ancient descriptions lining up so precisely with modern orbital disturbances? How is it that civilizations with no telescopes were describing planetary movements and cosmic events that our most advanced tech is only now detecting? There's something eerie about that. Something timeless. And here's where the plot thickens. Because as we chase this celestial ghost, we'll start noticing strange coincidences. Global elite investing in deep underground bunkers, sudden and unexplained relocations of government telescopes, satellite blackouts during key sky events, and even space probes like Voyager and New Horizons sending back encrypted data that never makes it to the public reports. Is this all random? Or is it strategic misdirection? Let's not pretend this journey won't be uncomfortable. There are moments ahead that will shake your sense of security. You'll begin to question what's been left out of the textbooks. You'll start to notice gaps in space missions, inconsistencies in scientific interviews, and strange moments when public discussion of Planet X gets abruptly shut down. We're going to look at NASA's own internal emails, declassified documents, and first-hand interviews from former employees who now live off-grid. There's one in particular, an engineer named Mark, who claims he was part of a project tasked with tracking a rogue planetary body. His story? It's coming up soon. And it might just change everything you think you know about space, safety, and silence. But here's what's most important. By the end of this video, you'll see the complete picture. You'll understand why NASA is quiet. You'll understand what Planet X is, or at least what it could be. You'll learn how it might affect Earth, what signs to look for, and what to make of the growing buzz online around terms like pole shift, magnetic reversal, and gravitational instability. These are no longer fringe ideas. They're being studied quietly by leading institutions under coded project names. And you're about to hear about all of it, directly and unfiltered. Right now, you're standing at the edge of one of the most compelling mysteries of our time. This isn't just about a planet. It's about hidden truth, manipulated perception, and a growing sense that something big is coming, and we're not being told the whole story. If you're someone who values knowledge, who doesn't shy away from hard truths, and who wants to be informed before the rest of the world catches up, this video is made for you. Not for clicks, not for drama, for truth. So stay with me. Don't just skip around or click out early because you'll miss key pieces of the puzzle. We've structured this entire story to unfold like a trail of breadcrumbs. Each segment builds toward the next. If you leave halfway, you'll miss the twist that ties it all together. And trust me, the final reveal will stop you in your tracks. Because just when you think it's over, just when you think we've said all there is to say about Planet X, something happens. Something that forces even the most skeptical scientists to take a second look. And that moment's coming up fast. But first, let's go back to 1983. A quiet press release. A mysterious infrared telescope in orbit. A brief moment when the Washington Post ran a headline that would later vanish from the archives. And a NASA spokesperson who admitted, for just one day, that a mysterious celestial object, possibly as large as Jupiter, had been detected near the edge of our solar system. After that, silence. Suppression. A wall of denial that continues to this day. What happened that year? And why is that event the key to everything that followed? That's where we go next. And once we open that door, there's no turning back. Back in 1983, long before hashtags could make headlines and YouTube algorithms could suppress controversial content, a satellite named IRAS, short for Infrared Astronomical Satellite, quietly scanned the edges of the known solar system. It was supposed to be a routine mission, just another step in mapping the stars and dust clouds in the infrared spectrum. But what it captured was far from routine. Buried within the data was evidence of a large, dark object, cold, massive, and moving in a way no known planet should. A Washington Post article briefly summarized NASA's statement. A Jupiter-sized body may exist beyond Pluto, possibly on a highly elliptical orbit. And then, without warning, the story vanished. The article was retracted, archives redacted, spokespeople reassigned. From that moment on, any mention of a so-called Planet X was treated as conspiracy theory, dismissed, ridiculed, or simply ignored by mainstream science. But the data didn't disappear. Not entirely. Now fast forward to recent years, and you'll meet the central figure in this unraveling mystery, an astrophysicist named Dr. Elias Roth, once a rising star at a West Coast research institute quietly funded by government grants. On the surface, Elias was no different from his colleagues. published papers, academic tenure, and a passion for celestial mechanics. But those closest to him began to notice subtle changes. He became increasingly reclusive, pulling long nights at the university's observatory, requesting classified sky maps through obscure government channels, and poring over decades-old IRA's data stored on encrypted drives. Colleagues whispered about his obsession with an object he called Nemesis. Friends assumed it was burnout, a midlife unraveling. But Elias insisted he had found something. Something no one else was willing to acknowledge. He stopped attending conferences, stopped publishing. Even his long-term partner, Lena, a fellow researcher and once his closest collaborator, found herself pushed away. She'd later tell investigators that Elias had grown paranoid, believing someone was watching him, following his car, intercepting his calls. At first, she thought it was delusion, until one night, Elias showed her a series of orbital anomalies in the outer solar system, movements in the Kuiper belt that didn't line up with known gravitational models. He claimed they were being tugged, not by a planet, but by something larger, denser, and approaching faster than anyone predicted. Then he vanished. No note. No emails. His university computer was wiped, his telescope logs deleted. But just before he disappeared, Elias sent one final encrypted file to Lena. Its subject line was simple: proof. Its contents, however, were more complex. Datasets from deep sky surveys, matched against old Soviet star charts, and notes referencing something called Project Silent Apex. Lena didn't know what to make of it. Neither did the authorities. But what stood out most was a small, grainy photo buried in the attachment, a dim speck of light captured in multiple frames, moving just enough to confirm it wasn't a star. Some believed it was an asteroid. Others weren't so sure. And this is where the uncertainty begins to bloom. Because while Lena was being questioned about Elias's disappearance, another character stepped into the shadows, an enigmatic figure named William Harlow, a former military consultant turned private contractor, with ties to aerospace surveillance programs and a knack for making data trails vanish. He approached Lena under the guise of concern, offering to help decipher Elias's findings. But his real intentions were far murkier. Lena later discovered that Harlow had connections to DARPA-funded projects in the early 2000s, ones that also tracked unidentified celestial objects using infrared telescopes. When she confronted him, he deflected with charm and vague warnings about things better left unknown. At this point, the story takes on the feel of a classic cover-up, but here's where it gets more complicated. Because another voice enters the mix. A retired NASA engineer known only as Ronald, who reached out to Lena after seeing an obscure forum post referencing Planet X and Project Silent Apex. Ronald claimed he had been part of the IRA's mission team and that the 1983 data wasn't just archived, it was intentionally buried. According to him, a joint U.S.-European task force classified any findings beyond a certain mass-to-distance ratio as planetary anomalies of national interest, a coded designation that effectively sealed the data from public access. Ronald said Elias had come close to accessing this data through backdoor academic channels, which might explain his sudden disappearance. Now we're left with questions that go far beyond science. Was Elias silenced because he found something? Or did he vanish willingly, in an effort to protect those around him? Was Harlow a threat, or a reluctant ally trying to navigate dangerous waters? And what about Lena, now sitting on a drive full of data she barely understands, hunted by people she doesn't trust, trying to piece together her partner's final message? The deeper we dig, the more blurred the lines become between paranoia and reality. Every time Lena opens another folder, there's a new anomaly, minor deviations in the orbits of trans-Neptunian objects, solar patterns that don't fit the sun's typical cycles, and even seismic data from Earth that seems strangely synchronized with cosmic events. She begins to suspect that Elias's nemesis isn't just theoretical, it might be active. But active in what way? Is it approaching Earth? Has it passed before, leaving a trail of destruction in human history? Are there ancient records hiding in plain sight, misinterpreted as mythology but actually referencing real celestial events? But here's the part that keeps the tension wound tight. Not everything in the data adds up. Some timestamps are inconsistent. Some files appear to have been edited. There are gaps, as though someone had carefully curated what she could and could not see. And then there's the metadata, file origins traced not to Elias's computer, but to a lab in Antarctica, a location known for its restricted access and rumored to house a multinational research facility focused on magnetic anomalies and deep space signal reception. Lena can't explain this. No one can. And yet, there it is, another breadcrumb in a trail that may lead to truth, or a carefully planted distraction designed to derail it. As she dives deeper, Lena begins to see the patterns Elias once obsessed over, not just in space, but in policy, in behavior, in silence. Suddenly, the shutdown of NASA's WISE telescope makes more sense. So, does the abrupt cancellation of certain sky monitoring programs, the redirection of funding from public astronomy to defense satellites, the surge in underground bunker construction, the shift in language from planetary discovery to gravitational anomaly, even trending search terms online, like doomsday planet, solar system secrets, and hidden space threat, reflect a growing public intuition that something is being kept from them. Still, nothing is certain. And maybe that's the point. Because the longer Lena searches, the more she begins to question the narrative. Was Elias's obsession the result of discovery, or the manipulation of one? Is the evidence of Planet X authentic, or part of a larger disinformation campaign? And if a cover-up is taking place, who benefits? Is it NASA? The military? A private corporation that's built its fortune on satellite technology? Or is the real answer even darker, rooted in a fear that if people knew what was really out there, civilization itself might begin to unravel? As these layers stack up, Lena's world begins to fracture. Friends distance themselves. Her emails are flagged. Her apartment is broken into. Nothing taken, but drawers rearranged, files shifted ever so slightly, like someone wanted her to know they had been there. She receives anonymous messages warning her to stop digging, some in encrypted code, others more direct. And still, she can't let it go. Because somewhere in Elias's data, somewhere in the blurry photos and shaky math, is the truth. But what that truth means, that's still unknown. And just when Lena thinks she's piecing it all together, when a new pattern emerges in the orbital charts and a strange, repeating radio signal is detected from a specific sky quadrant, something happens that makes her question everything. Because the signal? It's not new. It's been heard before. By someone she thought was long gone. And with that, the mystery deepens. And the real story begins. Just when Lena thought she had found a solid lead, something tangible to chase instead of abstract theories and scrambled data, it slipped through her fingers like sand in a storm. The radio signal she'd been monitoring, the one Elias had obsessively charted in his final days, was suddenly gone. Not distorted. Not faded. Gone. Erased from the global monitoring network she was quietly plugged into through an old colleague at the Deep Space Network. Even the archived logs vanished overnight, overwritten or corrupted in ways that screamed intentional tampering. Her contact, a soft-spoken analyst named Jordan who owed her a few favors from their university days, called her in the middle of the night. No greeting, no preamble, just whispered panic. Whatever you're tracking, you're not supposed to be. They know. The line went dead before she could ask who they were. By morning, Jordan had gone radio silent. His office was cleaned out, and the only thing left behind was a note taped to the inside of his desk drawer. Some things aren't meant to be found. Lena felt her stomach knot. This wasn't just academic paranoia anymore. It was real, and it was closing in. She tried reaching out to other former colleagues, people she trusted in the field, but none would speak openly. One friend even hung up on her after hearing the words, Planet X. The atmosphere had shifted. The unspoken fear was palpable. People weren't just ignoring the mystery, they were running from it. Determined not to back down, Lena turned her focus to the last clue Elias had left behind, the metadata trail that led to a mysterious Antarctic research station. She began researching the location, expecting vague references and publicly available reports. Instead, she hit wall after wall. The facility, listed on official documents as an atmospheric monitoring site, had no digital footprint, no employee records, no publication history, not even satellite images. Every time she tried to locate it via NASA's Earth observation database, the region appeared blurred or heavily pixelated. It was as if the place didn't exist, at least not in the way the public was allowed to see it. Still, someone didn't want her getting close. That became painfully clear when she received a package at her apartment. No return address, just a plain envelope containing a photograph. It was taken from a distance, slightly out of focus, but unmistakably showed Lena through the window of her own home, hunched over her laptop. Someone had been watching her. There were no words, no threats, just the image. And that silence was louder than any warning. But as terrifying as it was, she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything. What made it worse was the sudden reappearance of William Harlow, the shadowy former military contractor who had once offered to help with Elias's research. He resurfaced just as things were getting out of control, showing up at Lena's office one rainy afternoon, uninvited and too calm for the circumstances. Dressed in a tailored suit and wearing that same cryptic smirk, he acted as if they were old friends catching up. But his words carried a heavy weight. He said her recent activities had raised alarms in certain corners of the intelligence community. Not government, exactly, but private sectors with deep ties to national defense, space surveillance, and black budget programs. Harlow warned that digging further could trigger consequences not just for her, but for anyone connected to Elias. When Lena pressed him for specifics, he offered nothing but a cold look and one chilling line. "You're chasing a ghost, and ghosts don't like being seen." Lena didn't trust him, not for a second. But there was something about his visit that unsettled her. He knew things he shouldn't have. He quoted parts of Elias's notes, referenced folders she hadn't shared publicly, and even alluded to a classified mission Elias might have been part of in his early career, something Lena had never heard about. A mission involving anomalous magnetic readings in the Pacific, and a failed satellite that was quickly retrieved by private contractors before NASA could investigate. It was a secret buried so deep even Lena questioned whether it was real, but Harlow's knowledge of it gave him credibility that terrified her. Later that night, as she dug through Elias's old journals, Lena found something she had somehow missed before, a single line scrawled in the margin of a page that seemed otherwise unimportant. "Ask Miriam about 1997. She knows the truth." The name hit her like a jolt. Miriam Collingsworth, Elias's mentor, long retired, now living off-grid in northern Arizona. Lena remembered meeting her once during Elias's tenure review, a brilliant, stern woman who had warned Elias, even back then, to be cautious with his work. At the time, Lena thought it was just academic gatekeeping. Now, she wondered if Miriam had known more than she ever let on. But tracking Miriam down wasn't easy. She had no online presence, no phone listings, and the only address Lena found led to an old cabin on the edge of the Coconino Forest. When Lena finally reached it, after driving hours through desolate terrain, she was met with silence. The place was abandoned. Dust-coated furniture, shelves emptied, windows shattered by weather and time. But something felt off. Too clean. Too deliberately left behind. She began combing through what little remained, searching for any trace of Miriam, when she found a false floorboard beneath the kitchen. Inside was a box of old microfilm reels and a worn cassette tape labeled 1997, not for public release. Before she could even process what she discovered, headlights pierced the trees outside. A black SUV pulled up, unmarked, its windows too dark to see through. Lena froze. Whoever they were, they hadn't followed her by chance. She grabbed the tape and bolted through the back, running into the forest with nothing but the clothes on her back and her adrenaline surging. Behind her, she heard the cabin door creak open. Footsteps. Flashlights. They were searching. Lena didn't stop until she was miles away, breath ragged, skin scraped by branches. She finally collapsed in a dry creek bed, clutching the tape. But just before her phone died, she received a final anonymous message. It simply read, "Miriam lied to Elias." The real betrayal started in 1997. Don't trust anyone. What betrayal? Who was Miriam really? And what happened in 1997 that caused Elias to spend the rest of his life chasing a planet the world refuses to acknowledge? Whatever it was, someone had gone to great lengths to erase it. And Lena had just stepped into the one place they didn't want her to go. Would you like the next part to explore what's on the mysterious 1997 cassette tape, miles away from Lena's forced escape, across state lines and just outside Portland? Another thread of the mystery was beginning to unravel. At the same time Lena was fleeing into the Arizona wilderness, Elias's younger brother, Malcolm Hart, a once successful aerospace engineer turned reclusive conspiracy researcher, received an encrypted email that would pull him violently back into a past he had spent years trying to forget. The message was brief but impossible to ignore. If you still believe your brother died by accident, press play. Attached was a low-res video clip, grainy and distorted by digital artifacts, showing what appeared to be the interior of a secure government lab. At first, it looked like standard test footage, scientists around a metallic structure, blinking lights, unfamiliar equipment. But then the camera panned across a monitor. On the screen was a planetary simulation, orbit paths overlaid with red vectors, and in the center of it all, a flashing label, PX 97 Protocol Lockdown. It meant nothing to most people, but to Malcolm, it screamed in code, Planet X, 1997, just like the tape Lena had found. And there, in the background of the footage, barely recognizable but unmistakable to anyone who knew him, was Elias. Malcolm hadn't spoken to Lena in over 3 years, not since the funeral, when tensions and grief had pulled them apart, but he immediately tried to contact her. The call didn't go through. He sent texts, left voicemails, even tried reaching out to an old colleague of hers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Nothing. It was as if she'd vanished. But Malcolm knew his brother. He knew Elias wouldn't have walked into something like this without leaving redundancies, safety nets. So he started digging into the clip, pulling data from the video's file structure, searching for metadata signatures or encryption keys. What he found chilled him. The timestamp embedded in the video's code suggested it had been recorded not in 1997, but in 2023, 26 years after the alleged incident. That changed everything. Either the story about a 1997 cover-up was a lie, or someone had been running a long-term operation tied to a repeating cycle, a cycle that matched the mysterious orbital patterns Lena had been obsessing over. At the same time, Lena was back on the move. She had found a place to crash for the night, an abandoned ranger outpost miles off-grid, a place she remembered Elias talking about during one of his hikes years ago. There, she finally managed to rig a portable player from old field equipment to listen to the tape. What played wasn't just data or voice memos. It was a full-blown confession. Miriam's voice, hoarse and shaken, filled the small cabin as Lena leaned over the speaker. They found it, Miriam said. Not in 1997, but earlier. They called it a rogue celestial body, a brown dwarf with unpredictable gravitational influence. But it wasn't just drifting through space. It was moving with intent, looping back into our solar system on a cycle that defied known physics. Every time it neared, chaos followed. Climate disturbances, magnetic anomalies, disappearances. And then the voice trembled. We tried to shut it down. We erased records. We rewrote mission logs. But Elias, he remembered everything. Before Lena could finish the tape, her satellite phone buzzed to life for the first time in hours. It was a secure call, an old emergency number only a handful of people had. She answered, and Malcolm's voice cracked through, breathless and panicked. You need to get out of Arizona.
Now.
Someone sent me footage. Elias is alive. The line clicked and went dead before she could say a word. That wasn't possible. Elias had been pronounced dead, body cremated, service held. She had seen the grief on his mother's face, read the official reports. But if Malcolm was telling the truth, if that footage was real, then everything was far more complicated than even she had imagined. But something else troubled her even more. The longer she listened to the tape, the more she began to doubt Miriam's account. There were gaps in the recording, abrupt changes in tone, inconsistencies in the terminology. It was as if parts of it had been re-recorded, as though someone wanted her to believe a particular version of the truth.
But why?
To throw her off, to steer her toward a specific conclusion? And if Elias was truly alive, why fake his death? Why leave behind a puzzle that could only be solved by exposing people like Miriam? Things spiraled further when Lena returned to her car the next morning, only to find a red envelope tucked beneath her windshield wiper. Inside was a printout of her recent movements, GPS logs, timestamps, even traffic camera photos of her vehicle. Whoever had been following her wasn't just watching from afar, they were tracking her in real time. The note was simple, handwritten in sharp block letters. Keep looking, and you'll find what killed Elias. Or you'll meet it. At that point, Lena realized this wasn't just about Planet X or even Elias. There were layers to this conspiracy she hadn't even begun to unravel. There were factions involved, each with their own agenda, some possibly trying to bury the truth forever, others trying to weaponize it. And somewhere in between were people like Harlow, who seemed to move freely between both worlds, saying just enough to stay relevant, but never enough to be trusted. Malcolm, too, found himself caught in a dangerous web. Days after receiving the footage, his apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, but everything touched. His hard drives were fried. Backup data corrupted. Even his personal journals were missing, replaced by blank notebooks. On his front door was scratched a strange symbol, one he recognized from a classified aerospace design prototype he had worked on nearly a decade earlier. A prototype that was supposedly scrapped after a test went horribly wrong in low Earth orbit. The name of that test? PX-Veil. Now both Lena and Malcolm were chasing not just a hidden planet, but a hidden history, one littered with betrayals, manipulated data, and ghost trails of people who should have been dead but weren't. Every new clue contradicted the last. Every step forward felt like a deeper plunge into chaos. People they thought were allies began acting strangely, paranoid, evasive, or simply disappearing. It was as if the deeper they got, the more the rules of reality began to warp. And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get more surreal, a strange document appeared in Lena's inbox. No sender, no subject, just a PDF titled Return Cycle 12, Alignment Patterns and Behavioral Impacts. The file contained orbital charts eerily similar to Elias's sketches, overlaid with psychological profiles of individuals who had supposedly been influenced during previous return cycles. One of the profiles bore her name. Someone knew she was getting close. And now the real question wasn't just what Planet X was, but what it wanted. Would you like to continue with Lena and Malcolm decoding the PDF and discovering the link between Planet X and historical global events? Lena barely slept that night. The cold of the Ranger outpost was one thing, but it was the silence that unnerved her the most. Too quiet, too still, as if the forest itself had paused to listen in on her thoughts. Every rustle of wind against the walls sent a spike of adrenaline through her chest, and every time she closed her eyes, flashes of that strange PDF danced behind her eyelids. Her own name, listed beside terms like psychological interference, pre-contact behavior shifts, and theta wave distortions, made her feel less like a researcher and more like a subject in some cosmic experiment. She tried to rationalize it, tell herself it was just disinformation, a hoax meant to manipulate her curiosity, but deep down she knew something had shifted. Whatever trail Elias had followed before his death, she was now walking it too. And that trail, it seemed, was about to get darker. At sunrise, she packed her gear and planned to drive to a signal station on the outskirts of Flagstaff, hoping for better cell reception and maybe a secure line to Malcolm. But the moment she stepped out of the cabin, she froze. Her car door was cracked open, just slightly, no more than an inch, but enough to make her skin crawl. She had locked it the night before. She was sure of it. Moving cautiously, she stepped forward, eyes scanning the tree line. No movement. No sound. She reached the door and gently pulled it open. The inside was untouched, at least at first glance. But then she saw it, a small cassette tape sitting neatly in the passenger seat, labeled in red ink. Do not trust Malcolm. Her stomach dropped. The handwriting was eerily similar to the notes she had seen in Elias's old research journals. And yet it didn't make sense. Why warn her about Malcolm now, after everything they'd been through? Was it a message from someone trying to help her, or someone trying to isolate her? Back inside the cabin, she played the tape. The voice on the recording was digitally distorted, hard to identify, but it carried a tone that was oddly familiar. He isn't who you think he is. PX 97 wasn't his first project. Ask him about 2011. Ask him what happened at Site Echo. You'll understand why Elias never trusted him. If you keep listening to him, you'll never make it out. The message ended abruptly, replaced by a burst of static that seemed to go on for over a minute. Then silence. Lena sat in the dark, her hands trembling, her mind spinning in every direction. She had no idea what Site Echo was, but she knew Malcolm had once worked on classified aerospace contracts. Could he have been involved in something deeper, something he never told her or even Elias about? Desperate for answers, she tried to call Malcolm again, but her phone showed no service. She grabbed her car keys and bolted, not even caring about the gear she left behind. She drove fast, too fast, down winding forest roads, checking her mirrors every few seconds. That feeling of being watched was back, stronger than ever, like invisible eyes tracked her every turn. And then, as she reached the crest of a ridge and the radio signal flickered on, the emergency broadcast tone cut through the static. A voice followed. "This is not a test. Please stand by for further instructions." But no other information came. The broadcast repeated once, then disappeared into garbled interference. It was like a ghost transmission, meant for ears that were never supposed to hear it. When Lena finally reached a diner with a working payphone, she called Malcolm through a secure VoIP number she had used during her research days. He answered immediately, but something in his voice was off. He sounded rushed, distracted. When she mentioned the tape and the words Site Echo, there was a long pause. Then Malcolm said, "Lena, listen to me very carefully. You have to forget that name. If you keep digging in that direction, you're going to get both of us killed. I told you this goes deep, but you don't understand how deep. There are people, agencies, that aren't even on paper. People who think Planet X is just a distraction. A way to test psychological response before a real event." She tried to press him, to ask what happened in 2011, but he changed the subject, told her to get to a safe location and wait for his next instructions. He claimed he had new intel, files that tied everything together, but that he needed time to decode them. Before she could respond, the line went dead again. Not disconnected, cut off. And that's when she noticed the black SUV parked across the street, engine still running, two figures sitting inside, just barely visible through the windshield. They didn't move, didn't exit, but they were watching. She knew it. Panic surged through her veins. She left the diner immediately and circled around the back, cutting through alleyways and over fences until she reached an old pickup parked on the edge of a nearby mechanic's yard. She hot-wired it in under a minute, one of the many survival skills she'd picked up in field work no one had ever expected her to need again, and drove off without looking back. For the next hour, she kept changing directions, making random turns, even circling the same block twice just to be sure she wasn't being followed. But she couldn't shake the feeling that none of it mattered. Whoever these people were, they were already several steps ahead. As night fell again, Lena found herself parked beneath an overpass on an empty desert road. The only light came from the flickering dashboard and the endless stars above. She thought about Elias, how none of this would be happening if he were still alive. Or was that just another lie? If he was alive, why hadn't he reached out himself? Why hide in shadows, feeding breadcrumbs to Malcolm and leaving riddles for her to solve? And what about Malcolm? Was he genuinely trying to protect her, or was he manipulating her into doing what he couldn't do himself? Her thoughts spiraled until she felt physically sick. The paranoia wasn't just creeping in, it was consuming her. She remembered one line from the PDF that haunted her more than anything. Proximity to PX 97 may result in cognitive distortion and emotional instability in predisposed individuals. Was she becoming unhinged? Or was that exactly what they wanted her to think? Then came the twist she didn't expect. She reached into her bag to retrieve the cassette, planning to play it again, when she noticed something that hadn't been there before, a Polaroid photo. Faded, creased, and taped to the bottom of the tape player. It showed Elias, alive, standing in front of a strange facility surrounded by desert and fences topped with razor wire. In the background was a sign, half obscured by glare. Site Echo, no entry, without authorization. She had never seen this image before. And worst of all, Elias was holding a sign. The sign said, "Don't trust anyone, not even me." Would you like the next section to unravel what Site Echo really is and reveal what Elias might have been warning her about? Lena sat motionless in the cab of the stolen pickup, the Polaroid still clenched in her hand, its corners curling from the warmth of her skin. The words haunted her. Don't trust anyone, not even me. Elias had always been meticulous, grounded, never prone to melodrama or cryptic warnings. If he had gone to the trouble of leaving this message, then something truly earth-shattering must have happened. For the first time since she started down this strange path, Lena began to wonder if Elias had chosen to disappear, not because he was in danger, but because he had become the danger. The question burned in her mind as she stared into the desert night. What had Elias seen at Site Echo that could have fractured him so completely? Compelled by a mix of fear and resolve, she retraced her steps to the coordinates scrawled on the back of the photo. A forgotten stretch of desert, fenced off with rusted barriers and lined with faded signs warning of government surveillance and radioactive materials, standard fear tactics to keep the curious away. But Lena was past the point of intimidation. She used a bolt cutter to slip through the fencing and followed the cracked path toward the only structure visible under the moonlight, a concrete bunker, half buried in the sand, its entrance secured by a steel door welded shut from the outside. But nearby, she found something that made her blood run cold, a freshly disturbed patch of sand revealing what looked like a recently removed grate. Someone had been in or out, much more recently than the facility's condition suggested. She climbed down the exposed maintenance shaft, her flashlight casting trembling shadows against damp concrete and rusted pipes. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the buzz of old circuitry still somehow receiving intermittent power. As she moved deeper into the bunker, she began to notice the walls lined with audio reels, notebooks, and broken video monitors. It wasn't just a storage site, it was an archive. But of what? In one corner of the room sat a weathered laptop hooked up to a tangled array of hard drives. The screen flickered to life as she tapped the spacebar. A video file opened automatically. The grainy footage showed Elias, alive and gaunt, seated at the same table where Lena now stood. He looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, voice cracking, "then everything I've tried to prevent has already begun." He leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. PX 97 was never a celestial body. That was the lie. It was a decoy planted decades ago to draw attention away from what they were actually studying, us. The psychological patterns, the behavioral shifts, our response to the idea of planetary doom. We weren't researching the anomaly. We were the anomaly. Lena staggered back. It felt like her mind had fractured. Every page of research, every anomaly she thought she was observing from the outside, had she been the subject all along? Was Elias complicit in it from the start, or had he discovered it too late? Before she could process it further, a noise echoed from above, a metallic clang, followed by footsteps. Someone had followed her. She killed the light and slipped behind a wall of filing cabinets, holding her breath. A beam of light swept the room. She recognized the voice immediately. "Malcolm. I know you're here, Lena. You shouldn't have come." His tone was calm, almost mournful. "I tried to shield you from this. I told them you weren't a threat, but after you accessed the file, they decided you needed to be brought in. I stalled them as long as I could." She stepped out slowly, hands raised, her voice shaking. "You knew this was a psychological study? That we were all being manipulated?" Malcolm lowered his flashlight, revealing a gun at his side, not raised, but not holstered either. "I knew parts of it. Enough to realize the truth was worse than anything Elias or I imagined. It wasn't about PX 97. It was about conditioning. Seeing how much false information a population could absorb before questioning reality. You think this was just about you and Elias? Lena, this whole project was broadcast globally. Social experiments disguised as leaks, UFO sightings, even viral conspiracy theories. The fear of the unknown? It was the most effective control mechanism they ever tested. Lena shook her head, disbelief hardening into horror. So what now? You kill me? Bury this bunker again like nothing happened? Malcolm sighed, genuine sadness flickering across his face. You don't understand. It's already happening. Look at the headlines. Look at YouTube, Reddit, every platform. Misinformation about PX 97 is trending worldwide again, just like they planned. The chaos isn't coming, it's already here. You just happened to lift the curtain a little too soon. She backed away slowly, every nerve on fire. Then why tell me now? Why not just end it? Malcolm looked her dead in the eyes. Because there's one more thing you need to see. He reached into his pocket and tossed her a flash drive. That's the real research. Elias didn't die in the forest. He was extracted, reprogrammed. They erased parts of his memory and sent him back into the public under a new identity. You might have already seen him, and not even known. Lena felt the world tilt under her feet. Elias alive? Reinvented? Watching her all this time? Malcolm turned toward the exit but paused at the door. One last thing, Lena. If you really want answers, don't follow the data. Follow the broadcast. There's one transmission that never made it to the public. It loops every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. on shortwave frequency 11.822. But be warned, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And with that, he vanished into the dark. Would you like the next part to explore what's on that broadcast and where it leads Lena next? The moment Lena stepped out of the bunker, the desert air felt different, thicker, hotter, charged with a static energy that made her skin crawl. She clutched the flash drive tightly in her hand like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Everything she had believed up until now had been shattered in a matter of hours. She could no longer tell the difference between truth and manipulation, between discovery and design. Elias was alive. Malcolm had betrayed her, but spared her life. And now, with one flash drive and a strange shortwave frequency, she was being asked to go even deeper into a rabbit hole that had already consumed her mind and soul. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, she realized she had a choice to make: walk away and live with the half-truths, or pursue the full story and risk losing everything. She didn't go back to the motel. That place, once a fragile sanctuary, now felt compromised. Instead, she drove 2 towns over to a diner she remembered from years ago, the kind of dusty roadside joint where nobody asked questions, and the coffee was endless. She chose a booth in the corner and pulled out her laptop, palms sweating as she slid in the flash drive. The files were encrypted, of course, standard military grade, yes, 256, but Elias had left behind breadcrumbs. Hidden among the folders was a README file with a password she recognized immediately. It was the name of their dog growing up. She almost laughed from the absurdity of it. Once inside, her screen filled with a cascade of data. Medical files, psychological profiles, algorithm simulations. Hundreds of case studies showing how belief in Planet X had been stoked and tracked across demographics. It was all there, a digital roadmap of how fear could be implanted and evolved. And then she saw her name, her file. Every conversation, every search term, every time-stamped moment of curiosity about Planet X had been logged. She wasn't just another person swept up in the hysteria. She was a high-interest subject, a variable in the equation, a piece in the simulation. They hadn't just studied her, they had nudged her, steering her path through subtle psychological cues disguised as random occurrences. It was enough to make her stomach turn. And then came the real gut punch. The last video file in the folder was labeled Test 41A, Subject Reintroduction, Yelke. She clicked it. It wasn't Elias. It was her sister, Rachel. The footage showed Rachel inside a sterile room, seated across from an agent whose face was blurred out. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy and distant, like someone trying to hold together the last shreds of their sanity. "She won't stop," Rachel said to the interviewer. "No matter what I tell her, no matter how many times I try to throw her off the scent, Lena just keeps pushing. She thinks Elias vanished. But he didn't. You turned him into one of you. And I think she's next." Lena's vision blurred with tears. Rachel had known. All this time, through the panicked phone calls, the cryptic warnings, the arguments, they hadn't been about Elias. They'd been about her. The betrayal stung more deeply than anything Malcolm had done. She felt herself spiraling, drowning in a cocktail of heartbreak, rage, and confusion. What was Rachel's role in all of this? Had she volunteered? Been coerced? Was she protecting Lena or feeding her to the system? Before she could decide what to feel, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message. Just a location drop pin. The coordinates traced back to a residential neighborhood not far from where they grew up in Santa Fe. She stared at it, frozen. That place was supposed to be a dead zone, somewhere they had sworn never to return to after their parents passed. Why now? Why this? And then her laptop screen flickered. The flash drive had triggered a remote beacon. She saw the digital timestamp begin counting down. 3 minutes. Whatever data she hadn't pulled would vanish in 180 seconds. She scrambled to transfer as much as she could onto her backup drive, but it was no use. The files were locking one by one, encrypting themselves again, sealing behind new firewalls. Whoever controlled them was watching. The countdown hit 0, and her screen went black. That's when the second message came in. This time it was a video. No face, just a modulated voice and a low-resolution background of the Earth's atmosphere. "You've seen too much, Lena. But you haven't seen enough. If you want answers, come alone to the coordinates. And bring the drive. Do not involve Rachel. Do not contact Malcolm again. One wrong move, and your story ends the way Elias's should have." She leaned back in the booth, the weight of her choices crushing her chest. If she went to the location, she could walk into a trap. If she didn't, the truth would stay buried, along with everyone involved. And the worst part? She couldn't trust the one person she'd thought was family. Did Rachel betray her willingly? Or was she trying to protect her from something even darker? The waitress topped off her coffee without a word, as if sensing the heaviness of the moment. Lena looked out the window, the empty road stretching toward a future that felt increasingly out of her control. She was no longer chasing a mystery about a hidden planet. She was unraveling a truth about humanity, about herself, that could tear apart everything she thought she knew. But first, she had to make a choice. Would you like the next part to explore what Lena finds at the new location, and whether Rachel is still playing for the same side? The air outside the safe house in Santa Fe was damp with tension, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones. Lena parked a block away, keeping low, watching the place through a veil of trembling doubt and adrenaline. The modest ranch-style home looked abandoned, but her gut told her it wasn't. Every light was off, and yet the porch camera had shifted when she approached, just slightly, but enough to confirm she was expected. She clutched the flash drive in her pocket like a trigger, her every nerve wound tight around the knowledge that this wasn't just about Elias anymore. This wasn't even just about Rachel. It was about control, surveillance, and a program so vast, so deeply rooted, that entire generations had unknowingly played their parts in it. The Planet X narrative had been a decoy, a viral myth seeded to draw out the curious, the rebellious, the ones who questioned too much. And she had taken the bait perfectly. The door opened before she even knocked. A tall man in a gray sweatshirt and jeans motioned her in without a word, like this had all been rehearsed. She followed him into a basement that buzzed with the low hum of old servers and green-tinted monitors. A dozen faces turned to her, some she recognized from fringe online forums, others from her past. Her college professor, a neighbor from childhood, even the woman who'd sold her coffee at the gas station 2 days earlier. All of them stood, silent and watchful, like they had been waiting for this exact moment. Her stomach flipped. They weren't bystanders. They were part of it. Then Rachel emerged from the shadows. No longer the anxious, apologetic sister who'd left cryptic voicemails and begged Lena to let go. This Rachel stood tall, decisive, dressed in military-grade tactical gear. Her eyes were colder, sharper. The shift was impossible to ignore. "You weren't supposed to come here," Rachel said flatly, stepping closer. "You triggered the second phase. Now, everything changes." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "You knew what they were doing to Elias. You helped them." Rachel looked at the others, then back to Lena with a flicker of something that might have once been love or regret. "He volunteered. We all did. You think you stumbled onto some forbidden truth, but you were chosen. From the start, you were always meant to follow the trail." The walls felt like they were closing in. "Chosen for what?" "To lead the exposure," said her college professor, stepping forward. "Your path was calibrated. Your instincts, your trauma, your obsession, it's all part of the behavioral matrix. You're the final node. Once you confirm the system's real to the outside world, the test concludes. It's been years in the making." Lena staggered back, her mind spinning. Exposure? Test? None of it made sense. You're manipulating people into believing something that's not real, just to see how far they'll go. "No," Rachel corrected her. "We're seeing how far you'll go. This isn't about the world believing. It's about you believing enough to make others follow. You're the catalyst." She backed toward the stairs, heart pounding. "This isn't science. It's psychological warfare." Rachel's voice softened, just enough to be unsettling. "It's survival, Lena. There's more going on above us, out there, than you could possibly imagine. You think Planet X is the threat? That was the cover story. The real threat is what's already here, what's watching, what's influencing. You saw the simulations. You saw how easily the truth gets buried under data and noise. The only way to fight back is to control the signal." Lena's vision swam. She felt betrayed, used, cornered. She turned to flee, but the gray sweatshirt man blocked her path now. No one moved to stop him. They were all in on it. The room buzzed with a quiet understanding, like they had rehearsed this moment 100 times. She wasn't a guest here. She was a variable being managed. Her role was ending, or just beginning, and the decision wasn't hers anymore. "I'm not playing your game," she said, voice cracking. Rachel stepped in front of her, gently taking the flash drive from her hand. "But you already did. And now the real message is coming." From behind her, the monitors flared to life. A satellite feed flickered on screen. Coordinates tracked across North America. Signals pinged from cities Lena had passed through. Then a waveform emerged, something pulsing from deep space, repeating like a countdown. It wasn't just data anymore. It was a beacon. Rachel looked at her, her voice low and final. "They've responded." Before Lena could speak, the power cut out. "Would you like the next section to dive into what, or who, has responded, and whether Lena finds a way to turn the conspiracy against itself?" The silence that followed the blackout was absolute, thick, impenetrable, the kind that made your own breath feel like betrayal. Lena stood frozen in the dark, heart hammering, trying to orient herself in the pitch-black basement. No backup lights flickered on. No voices murmured instructions. It was as if the building had dropped into another dimension. She could hear the faint creaking of the floorboards above, someone or something moving. The flash drive was no longer in her pocket, but its weight still echoed in her palm like a phantom limb. The words Rachel had said churned in her head, twisting tighter with every passing second. "You're the final node. You were always meant to follow the trail." Then a whisper, so close she could feel the breath, brushed her ear. "Run." She didn't wait to figure out who said it. She bolted up the stairs, hands scrabbling against the walls, slamming into corners, until she reached the main floor. It was empty, abandoned, the door wide open to a night painted with flashes of lightning. Somewhere behind her, footsteps thudded up the stairs. Not fast, methodical, deliberate. She ran out into the rain, past her car, into the darkness of the hills, phone in hand, praying she still had a signal. One bar. Enough. She called the encrypted number Elias had once used, a last resort, a dead man's line.
To her shock, it rang.
And then a voice. Not Elias. You've made it to the end. Congratulations, Lena. She stopped running. Who is this? You don't need my name. But you do need to understand that this was never about a rogue planet. It was about perception. It was about how truth becomes irrelevant when belief is weaponized. We seeded Planet X into the internet. Then we watched. You were the last subject, the most resistant, the most intelligent, the one we thought might finally break the cycle. Her voice trembled. You lied to the entire world. You turned my family into test subjects. Because the world begged for a lie, the voice replied calmly. People don't want the truth. They want a narrative. Something they can follow, something that feels like discovery, but is actually control. Your brother?
He didn't die.
He joined us. And now, you'll choose whether to take his place. A crack of thunder split the sky. And there he was, Elias, standing at the crest of the hill ahead of her, soaked to the bone, but alive.
Changed.
His eyes lacked the warmth she remembered. He looked like someone who had seen too much and given up trying to return to normal. I never wanted this, he called out, voice nearly drowned by the wind. But it's the only way to survive what's coming. Lena's mind raced. She remembered every breadcrumb, every clue, every person who had warned her off the path. And she realized they were right to fear it. Not because of what she'd find, but because knowing meant you could never go back. Her fingers closed around her phone as the screen lit up, new files uploading from the drive that had been stolen from her earlier. It wasn't gone. It had been copied. Someone had wanted her to see it. Images flashed, satellite footage of objects beyond Neptune that defied known physics, classified experiments tracking brainwave manipulation through viral internet stories, behavior prediction charts overlaying political maps. It was all connected. The people she trusted hadn't betrayed her. They'd been reprogrammed. Elias hadn't joined them willingly. He had been broken. The man who had spoken to her now stepped out from behind a tree.
Tall.
Black coat. Familiar. Her old astronomy mentor from the university. He smiled like a priest welcoming a sinner home. Make your choice, Lena, he said. You broadcast this, and you fracture the public mind. You stay silent, and the experiment continues. Either way, you're not a victim anymore. You're the architect. Rain poured down her face as she stared at Elias. He looked at her, not pleading, not warning, just waiting. She looked at her phone again. The upload was at 98%. She had seconds. She could kill the signal now. End it. Leave the world blissfully unaware. Or she could finish it, release the truth, and watch the world burn in confusion and paranoia. She hit send. The data burst into the cloud. The man in the coat didn't move. He just looked up at the sky, then smiled, and said, Phase 3 begins now. But before she could ask what that meant, the stars above them shifted. Just slightly, but enough. Enough to see that Planet X was never coming. Because it had already arrived. Would you like to continue with an epilogue or final reflection from Lena's perspective? Days turned into weeks, and the world shifted in ways no one could explain. News stations flooded with reports of a global data anomaly, a cyber event that triggered mass confusion, fear, and a bizarre wave of awakenings. Millions claimed to have seen something in the sky that science quickly dismissed as a shared hallucination. The trending hashtags, #PlanetX, #TheUpload, #EyesOnTheSky, spread like wildfire across every platform, igniting conspiracy forums and live-stream debates. Lena watched it all from the crumbling remains of the cabin she had once considered her last safe haven. She had become both hero and pariah, a face forever linked to the digital leak that fractured society's perception of reality. But even amid the chaos, a strange calm settled inside her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was chasing ghosts. She had expected government agents or dark-suited figures to come for her. They never did. Instead, what followed was silence, strategic, unsettling silence. Articles vanished, videos were taken down almost as quickly as they were uploaded, and people who tried to investigate further found themselves locked out of systems, or worse, completely discredited. It was as if the truth had been too massive, too devastating, for the world to process all at once. And so it was buried again, not by force but by choice. The population quietly returned to their routines, choosing comfort over clarity, disbelief over destabilization. Lena knew this outcome had been calculated. The experiment didn't fail, it evolved. In the quiet moments, she still questioned everything. The drive, Elias, the man in the code. Were they parts of a simulation or threads in a deeply layered social experiment? The more she tried to piece it together, the more it unraveled. She remembered something Elias had said, a line she hadn't understood until now. You were never meant to solve it. You were meant to witness it. Maybe that was the real purpose behind everything, witnessing, feeling, understanding just enough to unsettle, but not enough to destroy.